And I wish to introduce our fourth speaker of the day. This is Reverend Dr. Stephen Eyeowa, SJ. Permit me, I might have missed something there. He obtained his doctorate degree from the University of Innsbruck, Austria. He is a lecturer of scriptures, particularly in Old Testament theology, exegesis, languages, and hermeneutics. He is currently the academic dean of the theological faculty at Ecclesial University College, Nairobi, Kenya, where he also teaches in the Department of Biblical Studies. Putting our hands together, let's welcome Brother Stephen.
Let me simply say good afternoon to you all. It's always nice to be the last person to present, because they would have done all the dirty jobs for you, and you only come just to, to round it up. And so I want to thank our principal who extended this invitation to me. And in a special way, I want to thank also Miss Angel for helping us to have what I would call a national reflection on the issues bordering on politics, bordering on economics, bordering even on education, and so many. Thank you very much. You decided to use two very important literary devices. The first is history telling as a way of conscientizing people. And the second is truth telling, not lamentation. Truth telling as a way of challenging people. So conscientization and challenging of people. And what I'm going to do here, I've been asked to talk about in hope we are saved. Since morning we've been hearing more of complaints about this continent called Africa. Not just complaints concerning the political space, but also complaints in the church and in the other room. And when I say the other room, I mean the bedroom. As we heard, with also the problems happening in marriage. Is there still hope for Africa? That is the question. So I will not take lament as a literary device. I would rather take optimism, hope, as a literary device. Every 25 years, the Catholic Church celebrates the ordinary year of the Jubilee. And this particular year, we are reflecting on hope. And of course, most of us expected something to come out of the process of the synodal process. But Pope Francis, in his usual way, did a very contrary to talk about hope. And he says, spes non confundit. Hope does not disappoint. However, call it a panoramic view of Africa tells us perhaps hope is disappointing us. How true is the Pope, or was the Pope, to say hope does not disappoint? We need to just look at what is going on in Africa. The problem is not so much that we are facing calamities, but what is more devastating is the fact that we are facing consistent calamities. And hope is not a question of what. Hope is a question of when. When will things be better? Politically, economically, culturally, even as we heard this morning, sexually, and even religiously. When will things be better? Most of us are just like the psalmist in Psalm 13. How long, O Lord? And that is why I'm asking the question, which is, what theology, what spirituality can restore hope in a continent that is going through paradoxical situations? What theology, what spirituality can bring hope in the present day Africa? Permit me to quickly present just one thesis, just one thesis as an answer to this question. We can move to the next slide. And this is it. Hope saves. Hope becomes salvific when the tragedies of this world are transformed into drama. Hope saves when we transform tragedies into drama. Perhaps before I move into this, let me quickly explain the term tragedy and drama. What is a tragedy? It is also a story. But it is a story that ends on a sad note. And what is a drama? Of course, the Gen Zs are used to the term happy ending. So if you don't know what a drama is, just say a drama has happy ending. Which means what? Even if there are sad scenarios in a story, the challenges, the difficulties will not challenge or will not swallow the main protagonist. The person will be vindicated. And so for hope to save in the tragedies of Africa today, we have to turn these tragedies into drama. Let's quickly do a bit of theology. Looking at the context, I'm not going to grill much into what I've prepared. I've already prepared something really very academic, but I will just adapt it to our context. And so I will proceed in four ways. The first is to propose a paradigm that can help us to turn tragedy into drama. The second will be to quickly, even though we've been hearing it since morning, just to mention something about the church in Africa. The cries of tragedy, the litany of tragedies that we are facing. The third will mean for us to then look at the conditions. Those who have done philosophy, especially the philosophy of Immanuel Kant, especially in this book, Critique of Purism, Immanuel Kant will talk about the condition for the possibility of knowledge. So, what will also be the conditions for the possibility of turning tragedies into drama? Changing our lives for good. That will be the third point for me. And then the final point will simply be the hope needed today in the African church. So I will go by these 4 points. So let us quickly do a bit of theology here. Since we are also spiritual people, let's do a bit of theology. Oftentimes when we talk about theology, we say that theology is a discourse, is a study of God. It is a discipline that tries to establish at least, call it, a fairly acceptable knowledge of God. And if that is the case, how we establish this knowledge certainly will vary. And that is why St. Anselm will consider theology as what? Faith, seeking, understanding. Because we continue to understand this person called God. But permit me to present a different theology today, a dramatic theology. And this theology is so important for us today because it is a theology that helps us to really turn despair into hope. And so please keep your speculative knowledge of God aside. Picture the world, picture God as an author of a story. It means God knows everything, both the good, the bad, the ugly, the terrible. A transcendent God. But again, keep that aside. Consider God also in this story, not just as an author, but an actor. It means God does not know everything. It means when I stand in front of God as an actor, whatever I do will influence the actions or the reactions of God. Is that not what we see in Genesis 3? That God had to change his plans. Is that not what we see in the incarnation? That God had to become man. It means what? God himself is in the drama, or call it even the tragedies of this world. And if that is the case, what is God doing as an actor? God is trying to transform the tragedies into becoming drama. And that is why we celebrate Easter. The turning of the tragedy of the cross into the Paschal candle, the light of salvation. And so God himself is an actor par excellence. An actor par excellence. And what is so interesting about this dramatic theology is that it is not so speculative or abstract. It is relational. Because it is no longer about control. It is about dialogue. It is about self-giving. And I think that is the vocation of the church today. The dramatization of divine love in history. The church can no longer stand aloof. The church must become an actor in the tragedies of our contexts. And it is in this way that the church can then go into this steel drama to transform the tragedies of life of our people into the drama of salvation. At this point, like God, the actor, it will no longer be about retribution, but restoration. It will no longer be lament of this prosper, it will now be hope. The happy ending can happen. So what is happening in Africa? So the second point, what is happening in Africa? We've heard so many things about this African context today. We just finished hearing the history, I would say, even of the struggles in Kenya. But in the midst of all of this, we are used to that phrase, Africa is a culture of life. And when we say that, we are saying it side by side, the history of colonization, the liberation struggles, the theologies of reconciliation, a culture of life from, call it, the perspective of the church, is about what? Communal ethics, spiritual practices geared towards obtaining reconciliation and justice. These we do not only find in the church, even people like Eyeowa, even Julius Nyerere, people like Desmond Tutu, John Beatty, all of them portrayed Africa as a culture of life. But contrary to this impression, it seems to me that the culture of life we talk about is not a economic reality. It seems to me it is a project to be fulfilled. Because when I look around, perhaps I see more a culture of death, economic vulnerability, governance inefficiencies, political instability, even environmental degradation, digital dependency, demographic illiteracy, and even external influence. All of these, summarize them in one word: poverty. Africa, I can say, is gradually giving birth to a refugee generation. Those who may not have an idea of home, but a strong attachment to jungles and camps. So what will be the role of the church in all of this? What will be the role of the church? And mind you, what we've noticed is that the more religion flourishes, the more we see chaos in the society, conflicts in the society. It then seems to me that religion is synonymous with conflict, with violence. These are our tragedies. And even the church is not spared. On the one hand, you call them faithful in the church. When they go outside of the church, they are known as citizens of the state. These are the same people. And so, the church is also a reflection of the state. And what do we see in the church also? Just like in the states. Again, we see the problem of, call it synodality versus hierarchy. We also see the problem of conservatives versus liberal youths within the church. Still in this church, we see a liturgical problem, the distinction or the conflict and tension between prayer and performance. Are we praying or are we performing? We also see on record sexual abuse go far to enter or to be victim of financial exploitations. Don't we see this in the States? And so the church certainly is not an imperfect, or is not a perfect institution. It's a church in need of reform. It means also there are many tragedies in the church. Yes, and that is why things are wobbling. That is why we see also in the church serious problem of syncretism and poverty. And things have become, call it, must live with reality. Realities that we must live with. And that is why Muslim Laurenti Magesa will say that when the church ceases to critique power, it becomes part of the machinery of oppression. When the church ceases to critique power, it becomes part of the machinery of oppression. So what do we see? In the tragedies of our lives, we are not able to distinguish between the church and the state. The loss of our moral integrity diminishes the credibility of the church before the weak and the vulnerable. The loss of our prophetic voice of liberation and adherence to the status quo increases the misery of the marginalized. So is it this church that we need to run to ask to teach us hope? Don't be discouraged. Remember the methodology we are using. The movement from tragedy to drama. And so, in a precarious Africa like ours, most of us now ask the question of the psalmist in Psalm 121. A very common text. I shall look up to the mountains. And now the question, from where shall come my help? And I say, even in the midst of the tragedies, our help shall still come from God, through the church. But then, what could be this help? In this summary called poverty, what could be this help? Perhaps it's not for us to also go to the extreme of the prosperity gospel. That will be church changing ourselves. Because this is the doctrine of the thoughts of the doctrine of divine favor being a sign of wealth, or wealth is a sign of divine favor. And so basically reducing salvation to transactional relationship. That is what prosperity gospel is about. It is, in the words of Robert, doctrinal confusion, superficiality. And in the words of Kadambole, it will be nothing but what? An ideology of consumption. So what we see in prosperity gospel is nothing really but people seeking profit and power. That is not how to give hope to those living in tragedy. So what theology then should we propose that will be very effective? What theology can then help to restore hope in a continent that is going through paradoxical situations? And I will suggest, indeed, a theology of hope. A theology of hope. And that theology of hope is such, again, that I said, as I said earlier, that is able to link. It's like a link bridge between the already and the not yet. To talk of hope is to find oneself in an eschatological realm. And so a theology of hope helps us to link that which is here already and that which is to come. It ensures a seamless movement between pessimism and optimism, between conflict and resolution, between skepticism and possibilities, between potentialities and feasibility. At the heart of this theology is to transform tragic experience of human existence into the drama of salvation, a pedagogy observed in the Paschal mystery. And so what will be the conditions? The first was what Angel did just now. Historical insertion, historical situatedness. For us to turn tragedies into drama, for us to move from despair into hope, we must learn, just as she has done, to soak ourselves in our history, to insert ourselves in our history. That is the beginning, the first condition. And when we are immersed in our history, what this does to us is that what we are not afraid of our context. We begin now to learn to dissect our context. Remember, even God, as that actor, was present or came into human history in order to better understand this history. And so the first condition is indeed this insertion, historical insertion, so that we don't again fall into speculations. And as we've been hearing since morning, the government must do this, must, we have to. When do we stop the language? We have to, and begin basically to hold the language. We are doing this. We are doing that. We cannot make that shift without being historically situated. The second will be conversion. One thing that history does to us, history telling, exactly what she claimed in her presentation. When we hear history, we are called to reflect. It takes us into conscientization. And following that process, we are disposed to conversion. And as Magesa would rightly say, the holiness of the church does not consist in perfection, but in continuous conversion towards the truth. And so the crucial role of conversion shows that the theology of hope requires, on the one hand, looking at our history, and on the other hand, trusting in possibilities. So the movement from tragedy to drama is itself a process of conversion. If I have not converted, and I'm not talking only of spiritual conversion, it's not a conversion from sin to grace alone. It's a conversion from what is evil to believing in possibilities. That is a conversion here. To say with God, all things are possible. And so for this kind of continent, this context, indeed, if Africa will remain what Africa is today, it will be simply because of our lack of openness and readiness towards conversion. Our inability to conceive possibilities. That will be The third condition will be not just to consider Christian hope as a mere hope for. Oftentimes when we talk about hope, we say, I hope for. This is a hope in something. The third condition will be a hope inspired by. So what I am hoping is not for a thing, but inspired by a being, a person, Christ. And when this happens, hope will not just then remain, call it, looking forward to something. It will be a forward moving. I am moving forward towards somebody. And is that not what we see at the cross? Is that not what we see with Christ? And it is in this particular understanding that we remain true even to the Christian doctrines of suffering and of contradictions. Because with these, we know that the project is moving forward. Moving forward. And so, the Paschal event of Jesus himself helps us, gives us the pedagogy on how to hope. Let's go back to this culture of life thing. And that will be the fourth. This culture of life understanding. Should we say we are lying to ourselves that we still talk about this? No, we are not. Perhaps also Africa is a culture of life. And in this way, by saying we're a culture of life, we are actually engaging in a prophetic venture. In the sense that, remember, hope is not just what is already, it is also that which is yet to be. And so, we prophesy what we want to become. A culture of life. And that is why, even in a sinking church like ours, when you go for liturgies, you encounter a sinking church. So in the midst of us drowning, sinking, because of hope, we are still able to sing. And so that helps us to then see the possibility of obtaining a chaos, I call it a cosmos rather, in the midst of our chaos. And so what then, what models of hope do we need in Africa? Permit me, my personality or my identity will betray me here. I will be suggesting two models. The first is coming from my Jesuit tradition, and the second is coming from my exegetical tradition. As a Jesuit, St. Ignatius talks about, that's the founder of the Jesuits, St. Ignatius of Loyola. In his spiritual exercises, he talks about the contemplation of the incarnation. And here, what do we see? Rather than following what is written in the Bible, Ignatius will add his own understanding to this contemplation. And for him, the incarnation came to be as a result of the chaos going on in the world. And the Trinity sat and we are looking at the world. And at the end they said, no, we cannot just let this to happen. We need someone to situate himself in the world. And the Son said, I will go. The conversion of the Son began in the person of Jesus Christ. So how do we turn tragedies into drama? Again, just like Christ, the incarnation, Christ was not afraid of entering into the tragedy of life. He goes in there and he wasn't also afraid of death. And we hear this in Philippians 2. Although God he was. He did not count equality with God. And not just that alone, suffered death like a criminal. But at the end of this, there is a crown, the glorification, the exaltation, that at the name of Jesus, knees will bow, tongues will confess. That is the point. Jesus entering and turning this into a drama. The second one will come really from the Bible. And it will come from Genesis 18, from verse 1 to 10. This is the story of Abraham encountering three men. Oftentimes we say they are the Trinity. I say, please don't force ourselves. Okay? But what is more interesting about this is when you read the text, in verse 1 we were told, the Lord appeared to Abraham at the oak of Mamre during the heat of the day. When we look at this, what do we see? We just look at that word, heat, the weather, just as a climatic something. You know, it's just the weather. But when you look at the life of Abraham, he was actually passing through heat beyond hope. So, he was called in chapter 12. And after the first 9 verses of chapter 12, from verse 10 of that chapter, up until this point, his life was in a mess. First, he had to flee to Egypt. Why? Because of famine. He had to give out his wife just to get wealth. He had to come back with a lot of wealth and then started facing another hit from his nephew Lot. And then they had to do what? To take a small portion of the land, and Lot taking the fertile part. He had to go in chapter 14 to go and fight war. In chapter 15, he had to again doubt the covenant. In chapter 16, what do we see? He had to be given a maid to marry, hoping that would be the way. In chapter 17, again this promise came. But he's still waiting. And in the midst of all of these heat, he was able to recognize that people are coming. And that these people are not ordinary. He was able to see beyond his tragedies. To also see that these ones who are joining under the hot sun, you must learn to turn first their own tragedy into drama. And in doing so, what happens? That anticipation came to me. This time around, hope isn't just what you will wait for long. This time around, especially in verse 10, hope is a waiting for a precise time. But what happened? He was active. He wasn't passive, even in the midst of tragedies. And that is the next point, that as we try to turn tragedies into drama, activity, conscious activity is crucial. And so let me conclude. It's already time. Let me conclude. And I conclude with a Yoruba proverb that says, when the eyes are in tears, let them ensure, or please ensure, that you still see clearly. Even when you are in tears, ensure that you see clearly. That your proverb is nothing but a dramatic theology. That in the midst of your tears, the ability to see becomes contradictory because you cannot see clearly. Your eyes are covered with tears. However, the wisdom in this proverb lies in the call to deliberately ensure that a drama comes out of one's tragic experience. And so, to get this point, to turn our tragedies into drama, a proper catechesis of the faithful regarding appropriate response to suffering is crucial. And what do I mean by proper catechesis? Perhaps when we are dealing with tragedies, when we are dealing with issues of suffering, our question should not be the question of Rabbi Kushner that will ask, why do bad things happen to good people? Perhaps that is what we've been asking, and that's why we've not been able to turn our tragedies into drama. The question we should be asking then should be this: what should good people do when bad things happen? Thank you very much. God bless.
Yes, thank you so much, Father Stephen, for this really invigorating insight. In a sense that in the both this afternoon presentation, the ending was very poetic. Okay, if all of us were very following on the presentation, it was very poetic. I'm not an linguistic or a literature teacher, but those who study poem, they know that a poem carries an implicit meaning that needs to be actualized. Okay, and the conclusion by Rabbi Kushner, the inverse is quite uplifting, Father. I never thought of that. I only went with that one. Why do good people suffer? Okay, but the vice versa clicks so well. Having said that one, there is a lot of wisdom when the judge says the judge speaks last. So thank you so much, Father. We clap for Father. Thank you for being the creative office of this message of hope to our audience today. So we are proceeding to a panel discussion, and since we are within time, can you clap for yourself? Clap for yourself.